Welcome back to the Freedom Footprint Show, a Bitcoin philosophy show with Knut Svanholm and me, Luke the PseudoFinn. Today, we're joined by Luke Broyles, the Bitcoin advocate and content creator who shot to Twitter fame through some excellent threads. And he's been spreading a bullish message throughout the community ever since. In this episode, we'll explore the language of Bitcoin and draw parallels with the advent of the internet while discussing the question, why is Bitcoin the least risky thing you can go for? We also discuss the everything bubble, Bitcoin's meritocracy, the dynamics of violence, and much more. But before we dive into all this, a reminder that the best way you can support the show is to stream us some sats or send us a boost on a value for value podcasting app like Fountain or Breeze. If you get value from the show, consider sending some value back our way. Each week, we'll thank the top boosts with a shout out in the show. Nothing this week, but we do want to say thanks to everyone who's been streaming us some sats. We appreciate it. If you're watching on YouTube, don't forget to like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss a weekly episode. We also want to thank the sponsors of today's show. First up, the Orange Pill app, Stack Friends, meet like-minded Bitcoiners near you, and speed up hyper-Bitcoinization. Next, Wasabi Wallet, an open source, non-custodial Bitcoin wallet with CoinJoin built in. And finally, Consensus Network, the first Bitcoin-only publishing house. You can find more information about our sponsors in the show notes, and we'll talk a little more about them later. And with that, here is Luke Broyles on the Freedom Footprint Show. Luke Broyles, welcome to the Freedom Footprint Show. Happy to have you.
Thank you very much for having me.
So can you tell us a little bit about yourself and how it's been to get into the Bitcoin community so quickly and how it's been to rise up like you have?
Yeah, it's been very strange. I had a few people in real life that were like Bitcoin interested, not Bitcoin only per se, and not understanding the historical significance of this, but I had a couple people that were interested in Bitcoin in my life, all the way back to 2017, 2018, 2019, and 2020, 2021 were the 2 years where I really started to dive deep, listen to lots of shows. Like, so it's been great. Now it's awesome to be here. But yeah, I really dove deep in 2020, 2021. I think those 2 years for a lot of people were years where they woke up or at least considered different viewpoints they perhaps had not considered before, just because the world got so crazy so fast. It was hard to miss. And even though the world's always been a little crazy, I think the degree and the speed at which it happened really forced people, including myself, to give things a second look. So I gave Bitcoin a second look because I knew people had extremely high conviction of it. And eventually I, went the whole altcoin route. I did less badly than most people do because I stayed away from the obvious Ponzi schemes and tokens, although, fell prey to some other ones. But basically, I then mid 2022 or so pretty much arrived on Bitcoin only. And for most of 2022, we tried to warn people that, hey, Bitcoin is this thing. Bitcoin's a huge threat to everything else, even though it doesn't seem that way. It's actually a very low risk. And I would argue the lowest risk thing out there, not the highest risk. And all these, altcoins and all this other stuff, even if you think it's interesting, it's just, its best case are unregistered high risk tech securities. And anyway, we can go into that more depth later, but basically that's why I eventually arrived at after a long deal of thought and learning. And here I am. And I had all these slides and thoughts put together over the course of these couple of years. Like, I'm a very visual person. I like writing my thoughts out. I like making flow charts and designs and everything. And so I just started putting it together for my own benefit, just for my own peace of mind. And then I started showing it to people in my everyday life, and most of them did not care at all. And so then in January of this year, I posted a few of them on Twitter and they blew up. And it's been very strange because now all of a sudden I'm talking to people like yourselves and I'm like, I know you all, I watched you all for so long. And, been invited to events. And so I'll be at like Bitcoin conference in Miami in May and everything else. And so it's been kind of a whirlwind. It goes the good way and a bad way, but almost entirely the good way. So
I think everyone in Bitcoin has sort of a similar story. I mean, a lot of us have just, popped into the scene, and then all of a sudden we get something. We're a hen that finds a golden pebble in finding a nice tweet or a nice thread, an equation or whatever, and all of a sudden we blow up on Twitter, and it's quite a weird experience. I've experienced it myself, of course. So I thought it would be interesting to contact you, like now, when you have this experience so fresh and happened to you just a month ago, or two.
What was that like for you when you experienced it? I'm not too familiar with your or just I'm familiar with your work, but how did you blow up on Twitter? What caused that, and how did you feel?
Well, it was like first it was the books. If I backtrack this even further, like even before Bitcoin, I had the experience of having a video go viral, and that was a music video for my old rock band that ended up on the Pirate Bay's front page. So they had something called the Promo Bay at the time, where they promoted local bands, and here, all of a sudden we were seen all over the world and got 100,000 YouTube views overnight, and that was a weird experience. But that sort of gave me the courage to and motivation to try something on the internet again, because I knew it's not impossible. You can get this attention if you're lucky. And then I had an article that went sort of semi-viral back in 2017 about how to get control over your private keys, which then led me to write more and to publish a book, and then publish a proper book, because the first one was just a collection of articles. And then take that book to Riga and give it to some Bitcoiners. And then I wouldn't say that that book, Sovereignty Through Mathematics, wasn't really an overnight sensation like that. It sort of grew steadily over time. But what really blew up was the equation on Luke's t-shirt there, which is from an article called Deeper Down the Rabbit Hole, which featured a sentence that said, "Imagine everything there is divided by 21 million." Which we later turned into a video that featured that beautiful equation. And that just completely took off. And people started adding it to their Twitter handles. And I have a whole folder on my computer with everything divided tattoos, with over 20 pictures of people with that equation on their bodies. So that was the real weird experience, especially coming to Miami last year when people recognized me on the street and stuff in Miami, which is something I never thought I'd experience. So that's my experience with recognition thus far.
Yeah, that's fascinating. That's kind of what I've had. That it's been great in that I get so many messages to people that say, and this isn't to, brag about myself. I'm sure you've gotten this too, but it's like, people will say that, "Oh, you've changed my life," or "You've changed my worldview," or "Kids get it now," right? Parents. I mean, it's amazing. I get messages from people that, some people from developing nations that like saved their first $20 in Bitcoin, which for them is a big deal. And other people that, sold like $500,000 of NFT garbage to buy Bitcoin. It's very surreal to experience.
The first such experience I had was from a guy that fled Venezuela, and he thanked me for motivating him to, remember his seed phrase and flee the country. And that was just the goosebumps I got from reading that message is just undescribable. Like, holy shit, my words here that I sit and conjure up in my bedroom actually affected someone so much that they fled their country, fled a dictatorship, and got away. And it's just mind-blowing that how much these things echo in across the world. And it's humbling, and it's very motivating, because you can see that you can actually make a difference in the world. And it's something that I never aspired to before it literally happened to me. So very grateful for that. And you seem to have hit one of these golden pebbles at least. I mean, people appreciate those Twitter threads a lot. I think you condensed things very nicely and put them together. It's a lot of thoughts that, like all the thoughts in the Bitcoin space, someone is bound to have thunked them before you. And you're just like reiterating and reformulating whatever. I mean, we're all standing on shoulders of giants here.
Yeah, that's how I definitely put it. One of the reasons I didn't post on Twitter sooner, I got a Twitter account May of 2022, and I didn't post a single thread on it until my first one. That first one was the one with Bible in January of 2023, almost a whole year later. But I didn't post earlier because I figured, like, who would want to hear my thoughts? Frankly, like you said, pretty much everything that I posted on Twitter is basically either directly from someone else or it's just an extrapolation of something or another principle. Someone maybe such as yourself, I quoted infinity over 21 million probably 50 times already, and so it was very humbling to have all the attention because I didn't feel particularly smart. I didn't feel particularly insightful, but I think what people really crave, and I think what people really crave about your infinity over 21 million idea is the articulation of it, the succinctness of it. And that's one of the reasons why I'm so excited to talk to you is because I think that equation a lot, infinity over 21 billion, and that, reality is probably in 50 years when Bitcoin has 5 to 8 billion users, the vast majority of those users aren't going to understand how Bitcoin works or difficulty just there'll be a lot of the tech they don't understand in the same way that a lot of us don't understand how the internet works. But probably most, if not all of those people, at least the vast majority will understand that scarcity and will understand infinity. So anyway, it's really cool to me that simple little idea that you contributed, today is blown out, and over the next couple of decades might even, one of the most famous ideas in the world.
Even Hal Finney was on to something similar. So I stumbled upon a nice way of putting an idea out there that other people had thought before me. But it's I think it's a very the equation makes no mathematical sense, of course, at all. But it's a nice way of putting characters together. It's like the most condensed way to explain Bitcoin, in my opinion.
Why do you say it makes sense?
Because infinity divided by 21 million is infinity. So the equation is pointless from a mathematical point. But then again, I thought about that for a while, and in a way, it was embarrassing. Am I going to be remembered for a stupid equation that doesn't mean anything? But then again, I started thinking about all the other famous equations from history, and none of them made sense at the time. They only make sense in hindsight. That's the beauty of novel equations. They don't make sense in the times when they're created. Most people disregard them as bullshit until they see the beauty of it, which can take some time. I mean, Maxwell's equations and so on, I guess they didn't make sense until later on, and Euler's formula and all of this beauty in mathematics.
I would say it does make sense, at least specifically with Bitcoin, because one of the things I tell people, because as you both know, one of the things people often criticize or wonder is, do I have enough? Do I have enough Bitcoin? And, this idea of infinity over 21 million, that there's an infinite amount of prosperity, there's an infinite amount of credit, there's an infinite amount of everything in the world besides Bitcoin. So the way I put it to folks is that if you have like a Mona Lisa and the frame is, finite, there's a finite amount of the painting. It doesn't matter how much of the painting you own, we go down infinitely, a smaller and smaller and smaller portion of it. And that smaller and smaller portion becomes more valuable as a larger portion previous. And so to a certain extent, I understand that, infinity divided by it's also infinity, but I think that's also correct, even though it doesn't make sense.
In hindsight, it should really be a sigma sign, because it's not an infinite amount of value, but it's all the value. It's the sum of all the value and all the potential value, which is quite a lot too. It's just not infinite, because infinite is completely pointless to talk about. I mean, there's not even evidence that anything infinite exists at all. I mean, it would be impossible to prove because it will have taken an infinite amount of time. So but the infinity sign is way cooler than the sigma sign. So graphically, it makes sense. Yeah, you said something in the beginning there about what was that? Yeah, how Bitcoin is the least risky thing, and I'd like to pull your brain about that a bit. The way I see it, it's because people don't realize why it's the least risky thing, and it's, in my opinion, it's the least risky thing because the only threat to it is that all of a sudden people would stop agreeing with each other on a rule set that is beneficial to everyone who follows the rule set, because it's just an agreement on a fixed set of rules. And it's nothing more and nothing less than that. All the computers involved, and we call it a technology, but it's not really a technology. It's just a language. And we use the computer to make it easier for us to communicate in that specific language, which is mathematics and code. And it's nothing more. And that's all it needs to be. And that's why I find it so infinitely beautiful, because why would people all of a sudden not find it valuable when they very clearly find it more and more valuable over time? And all we need is to trigger the curiosity of minds like yours and everyone who's clever enough for it to click. And once it clicks, and there's no going back. I mean, why would there be a going back? If we have this, as you say, a Mona Lisa that can be divided into an infinite number of parts, why would we ever not want to own a piece of that? Since it's like the perfect representation of everything. And I just don't see that happening. I see the opposite happening. And that's why it's, yeah. So in my opinion, the biggest threat to your Bitcoin is yourself, always. And that you fuck something up.
You're the biggest risk, but you're only risk to your portion. You're not the risk anyone else's. Yeah. No, I would agree with that. I would agree that is the largest risk and arguably the only risk. I think there's definitely other, if we're here and we're going there, or here, and the paths are here or there, there may be risks along the way, and I think a lot of people get hung up on those, the whole censorship discussion, or what if there's some sort of EMP or this or that, the other. And, really, I think that's all worthy speaking of, although I'd rather not right now, because I think that those are all more like curves in the path to the end destination. And I think they're just hurdles along the way. But yeah, I think the long-term only threat is exactly what you said, that if there's, what is money? What is value? What is Bitcoin? Well, it all comes down to human trust. And the only way that Bitcoin fails is if humans don't trust the idea anymore. The miners could change, who holds the key, who holds the coins can change, who talks about it, who loves it, who advocates for it, and who hates it, all that will change. But if at the end of the day, the idea survives and the ledger survives, then it's basically indestructible. Like, it's one of the most indestructible things we have, because it's an idea like all other ideas on Earth, except there's an extremely high monetary incentive to preserve the idea, because somebody else might be willing to pay you a lot of value for it. So I agree with that. What I mean by the lowest risk is something that I've been saying on Twitter, and I think you would probably agree with me here. But, I think a lot of people, that doesn't make sense, even Bitcoin curious or Bitcoin interested folks. And some people suggest that I don't say that because it sounds unprofessional, or sounds disingenuous, or it sounds like a stretch or whatever. And respectfully, every time I come back and say it's what I genuinely believe. And I think it's such a stark statement that it warrants further insights. Like, okay, either this guy is on crack or he's correct. And so in the same way that you're the New York 21 million, I think it's the same idea, that it's like, okay, either that's insane or it's hinting at some essential truth that I need to find out. And so when I say that it's the lowest risk already, what I mean is that I believe most people are vastly misunderstanding what risk is today. All the time, people think that Bitcoin is risky because it's volatile and it goes up and down and it's new, and people have volatile opinions about, not just the price or the exchange rate, but volatile opinions about it. And so what we often think that this thing inherently has to be risky because people have varying opinions on it, because its exchange rate is volatile and because it's new. And well, the first metaphor I give for that is regarding the internet. If you were to go back, if we were to go back in time to, I was born in 1989. So if we were to go back to then, I would argue the lowest risk thing to buy then, if you could have theoretically, would have been like bandwidth of the internet or like a portion of the internet. Imagine if you could divide the internet 21 million pieces. I think that would have been the lowest risk asset on Earth at the time. And the reason for that, because even though the internet was new and its use cases were still emerging, I think by then, late 90s, early 2000s, for those that were tech savvy, it became obvious that this thing was the future and it was probably going to become the global communications network. And when you're in that transition period between an old paradigm and a new paradigm, the only logical thing to do is to allocate to that base layer within the new paradigm. So, you could stay away from buying this theoretical bandwidth of the internet and stay in your bookstores and radio and every other business model. It doesn't even have to be like communications specific business model, like radio, newspapers, or bookstores. It could be something else entirely. But as we all know, the internet changed everything and it destroyed every business model and every politician and every individual's career that didn't eventually either adapt to it directly or indirectly work with someone that adapted to it. And so in the same way that it's theoretically lower risk then with the internet, I believe it's literally low risk with Bitcoin. And the reason for that is, like you said with Hal Finney earlier, I think it's a great point. I want to touch on that again. I find Hal fascinating. But as you know, the first week of Bitcoin's existence, all the way back in 2009, he predicted basically infinity over 21 million.
I know it's insane. It's insanely, He saw that just by extrapolating that thought vector. So that's what he does, and that's what I think we do too. And what's so uncommon, what we do that is uncommon is randomly extrapolate things because extrapolation is underrated as hell. People don't think things through.
It's definitely a rare skill, and it's even more rare to get it right. But he definitely got it right there. He extrapolated that eventually, as both him and Satoshi said, either Bitcoin is going to become more valuable than any of us can conceive, or it's going to zero. Like one of the two. And there's really nothing we can do about it. It's just what the free market's going to do. And if it gets any traction, it's probably going to the former and not the latter. And so, all the way back in 2010, 2 years before Bitcoin crossed a single US dollar in its exchange rate, Hal Finney predicted a $10 million US dollar Bitcoin. And, now that's like outdated because that was back in 2009 when 10 million was a lot more money than it is today. That's more like 26 million or whatever it is today. I don't know exactly, but it's at least double that, I believe. And, probably in a few years, it'll be double that again. But anyway, all I can say is that to his point of what he's saying, and I believe he's correct, it was that Bitcoin is basically a threat to the monetary premium of everything else on Earth. Obviously, political currency units like the US dollar or the euro or other fiat instruments, obviously those are on the chopping block. Bonds obviously are on the chopping block and arguably even higher risk depending on your time horizon. But that's on the chopping block. Bonds are basically entirely monetary premium. Real estate, you have real estate. Perhaps that's less risky than those other things because there's also the consumer good of the land and the building itself. But, a considerable portion of all real estate's monetized. Stocks are monetized. Gold's monetized. Art is monetized. Pretty much everything on Earth. And everything on Earth has some degree of monetary premium because when the money is bad, value flows out of the money and into everything else.
Yeah, the everything bubble. Everything is in the everything bubble.
Yeah, the everything bubble. And when that bubble pops, what causes it to pop? Well, it's because now we suddenly have good money and the need to inflate everything else and this everything bubble to offset the debasement and the bad money. All of a sudden that need disappears and all that monetary premium evaporates and flows back to the good money. And that's basically how Finney was predicting. And so it's like, okay, if we think of that thesis, people watching may not agree with us right now. Probably a lot of them do, but maybe they don't. It's like, but okay, even if we don't agree with that thesis, what probability, what possibility do we want to assign that this thesis is correct? Because it's a binary outcome. It's not, Bitcoin gets some market share and it just hovers there stably forever. No, it's either Bitcoin is 1 or it's a 0. It's either on or off. Or if we think of it from an engineering perspective, it's like a closed or open system. Either the plane flies or it doesn't. It's not going to fly or, a rocket ship doesn't have to get to orbit. It either does or it doesn't. And so either Bitcoin succeeds or it fails. And what percentage do we want to say that it might succeed? I think for me, I'm going to say well over 90%, 95, 99%, whatever. But for the average person, I think to say that the most secure computing network in the world, that's also just an idea as we're talking about, has at least a 51% chance of survival or 50.1% chance of survival. I think that's not just reasonable. I think it's like absurdly reasonable. And if that's the case, then by one's own admission, it's more likely that everything else trades to zero against Bitcoin infinitely forever versus Bitcoin having any threat. So even if you think there's a 49% chance that Bitcoin somehow dies or evaporates or whatever, it's still the lowest risk thing you could buy. At least that's the way I would put it. Because the risk is now so great to everything else, and Bitcoin is both the cause and the solution to all this monetary premium evaporating. I think when this clicks for people, that's really going to hyperdrive adoption when they realize that Bitcoin's not a risk on asset, but a risk off asset.
Yeah, I'm getting a picture in my head here of with Bitcoin and Fiat, the two columns of risk and trust, and what falls into one category and the other. And for Fiat, you basically have to trust a small cabal of politicians and central bankers to be able to make better decisions about what to do with your life at each moment than each and every one of us. You basically trust that they are better at making decisions for you than you yourself are. And that is true for everyone. Voluntary actions and interactions with other people. That's what the free market is. Like we don't engage in a trade if we don't benefit from it. Both benefit from it. And we have given away parts of that trust to these institutions and these rent seekers. So that's what you're trusting when you're trusting the fiat system, and you're trusting that the everything bubble won't pop, and that they will keep on rolling the snowball down the hill. I like that expression better than the can down the road, because the snowball grows, the can doesn't. But this is a snowball rather than a can, and we're just snowballing debt and pushing it onto our children. So they have to print more money and exchange it for a government bond, which is a promise from the government to steal even more from your kids than they stole from you. And they have to pay whatever they want stolen in cash that is worth less than it was before. And all of this is simultaneously inhibiting our ability to be productive and for the market to actually progress into the future.
No.
Then you have Bitcoin on the other side. You have to trust yourself with remembering 12 words or 24 words, or storing a 30-character key on a piece of paper somewhere, or whatever. You have to trust yourself with that. And the other thing you have to trust is mathematics. So you have to trust that 2 + 2 still equals 4. But that's basically it. It includes a couple of branches of mathematics, like game theory, which might be counterintuitive to people, but it's still true. I mean, there's that example of a game show host where you get to pick one box, and the game show host opens the box in the middle and said, the prize wasn't here. Would you still like to cling on to that box, or would you like to switch boxes? And the correct choice is to switch boxes. And it's very counterintuitive to people, but there's a 66% chance that you win if you switch boxes, and only a 33% if you don't. And so game theory is counterintuitive by nature, but it still works out. It's still as true as 2 + 2 equals 4. So you have to trust mathematics, game theory, elliptic curve cryptography. and that thing works and that it won't be hacked anytime soon. If you can grasp how hard it is to find a pebble in the Andromeda galaxy, you understand about how hard it is to crack that thing. The other thing you have to trust is software and hardware. And hardware, well, hardware is pretty hard to trust, but then again, not that hard, because these machines, it would be quite a thing if they, installed backdoors into every single computer ever created. And the simpler the computer is, the easier it is to check that the hardware is not corrupted. And you need to trust software, but the software is all open source. So what you really need to trust is a community of people who don't trust each other, which has proven over the years to be the best form of computer security model there is. Like, open source software is better than everything else. So you need to trust these things. If they hold true, and they have proven to be very, very true and very, very resilient to any form of attack for the last 13 years, then Bitcoin is the obvious choice, because your only other choice is the snowball of the everything bubble.
Yeah. No, I fully agree. I think we're already well past the point where Bitcoin's risk has lowered past the inherent risk in, the current paradigm. And I think we're already so far past that point that it's inevitable that other people in mass that don't have particular interest in this decade, or maybe even in the next few years, begin to realize that the entire risk situation has completely shifted. And all the time, especially before I got, quote unquote famous on Twitter, people would ask me why I'm so eager in talking about this. Why are you so loud? Pounding the table. And that's the exact reason. I think it's inevitable that there's going to be a concerningly large number of people that have their entire worldview of risk completely shift in the next few years. And it's one thing for people to be curious and excited and optimistic about a new thing and add it to their portfolio just a little bit, just as a curiosity or just to try to get rich or whatever. It's an entirely different thing when that same person has their portfolio that they spent hundreds, if not thousands of hours upon, paid somebody 1% to 2% annual fee for decades to manage. And then they suddenly realize that whole idea, even if it survives, its risk has just ballooned, and it's only going to continue to balloon exponentially. And, again, game theory, then you realize, wait, everyone else also realizing this simultaneously as I am, and only more people are going to realize this.
A question. Do you live in an area where there are a lot of other Bitcoiners around?
No, actually I don't. I'm going to meet Greg Fonts tomorrow.
Oh, great. Say hello from me.
Yeah. Greg Fonts is actually going to be the first Bitcoin only maxi person that I will ever meet in real life. So it's going to be quite for Greg, my first. So
yeah, I spent 4 days in a bus with him in Bulgaria, and I'm still thinking of making that I survived 4 days in a bus with Greg Foss t-shirt. So it's coming.
Definitely should.
Well, Greg's great. The reason I ask is because when you're in a place where, I don't live in a place with a lot of Bitcoiners around either, but I spend a lot of time on Madeira, and the latest couple of occasions we've been there, and when there's a lot of Bitcoiners around, or whenever you're at a conference and there's a lot of Bitcoiners in town, all of a sudden all problems go away because you have this magic thing, and you can use it in any way you want. So like if someone's running short on fiat, that's never a problem. Or if like you're splitting a restaurant bill or whatever you're doing, as long as you have this Bitcoin running in the background, and we can just, Bitcoiners can live in this other universe that normies just haven't found yet. And it's so beautiful. And I think the real tipping point is when people realize that. Now there are Bitcoin ATMs every here and there, and you can convert your Bitcoin to fiat, but it's only a matter of time until everyone in that mall where that Bitcoin ATM is, until everyone realizes that the ATM is completely redundant and pointless when they could have just used Bitcoin peer-to-peer, or everyone. So like the necessity for all the other money goes away when there are other Bitcoiners around. And it's such a beautiful thing. And I think at some point it will be extremely hard, if not impossible, for politicians to even make it harder for people, because people are going to crave this so much. Like, why the hell am I living in a country who puts like draconian taxes on this thing when my neighboring country can just operate on a much more efficient level and just exchange sats whenever you want? It's going to be, especially with the Lightning Network, it's going to be extremely hard for politicians to like hunt people down for using Bitcoin. I think it will be impossible. It's going to be just like file sharing. You can try and you can make an example of a couple of people, but in the long run, it's impossible to stop. And even more so when it comes to Bitcoin, because it's very hard to motivate why people, voluntarily exchanging a mathematical number for a service, why that is a bad thing and why it should be a crime. Like, how do you motivate that politically? In the long run, it's impossible, because everyone using it benefits from it, and everyone will realize that at some point. So I think, I just hope that the critical mass happens before some evil politicians start to make life harder for us that are pretty public about the thing.
Yeah, it's definitely possible. But similar to you, I'm optimistic on that. I think it'll only get more difficult for them at an exponential rate. And the government increasing orders of magnitude efficiency is far more difficult than Bitcoin. Bitcoin's at 0.1, 0.05 adoption, whatever it is. And it's already so difficult that the Chinese Communist Party can't stop it. They've tried many times. Their most recent one has failed. The hash rate back in China. So it's like, what happens if Bitcoin's 10 times larger, 10 times more secure, 10 times more valuable with 10 times the people? It's like the Chinese government can't get 10 times bigger at the same speed. They just can't. They can't get, and they've already failed. So they probably have to get more like 50 times. So, I mean, yeah, like you, I'm optimistic.
Yeah,
and
because
I think China can't do it now. I don't think anyone's going to be able to do it in the future.
No, because even right now, I can put a gun at the head of any person in the world, like to any person's head, and say, give me all your Bitcoins. And they can give me some of their Bitcoins. And I have no way of knowing if that was all the Bitcoins or not. So the dynamics of violence are already changed to the point where it makes no sense for me to threaten people. It makes much more sense for me to just interact voluntarily and provide something of value back. We're already at that point. Maybe the politicians haven't figured that out yet, but in reality, we're already at that point.
I would love to hear your thoughts on, I'm sure you're familiar with Tesla's predictions of Bitcoin back in 1900, and like basically extrapolating what you're saying, except in addition to the individual, also like the nation state. Both Ford and Tesla said that this eventual thing that today we realize is Bitcoin in hindsight, that this eventual thing would take away incentives from war and state-on-state violence. And so therefore their conclusion was that this eventual thing would greatly reduce the need, necessity, and abundance of violent conflict. Like, what do you think?
Yeah, I saw that in a thread. That was your thread, I guess, about Ford and Tesla. I think it reduces violence on every level of society, because it makes coercion a lot harder. Makes taking away stuff harder, taking people's stuff harder, and that operates on every level of society. Because like even now, especially coming back from Madeira and meetings with the president and everything, I know how many Bitcoiners there are in that parliament. And if there are so many there's bound to be a Bitcoiner or two in every other parliament of the world as well, planting the seed there. I mean, politicians are in general bad actors, but every here and there's an honest person there that just happened to end up in that situation and who gets it. And I think it's going to be very hard in the future for nation states to be anything else than service providers that compete with one another. And I believe that's a transitioning phase too, and that is only going to be the case for a couple of hundred of years, maybe, if even that, and then they'll phase out because one thing that I think is underrated is this: a Zoom call. Before the lockdowns, this wasn't really a thing. People had physical meetings, and this wasn't used at all as much as it is today. And the technology wasn't really there. There was a bit of lag and, issues with video and audio, but it's become so much better in the last couple of years. So right now we have social media, especially with Nostr and all these decentralized alternatives that are coming up. We have the ability to contact absolutely anyone in the world and have a video call with them instantly. So we already have face-to-face communication with anyone else in the entire world. And what that does, I think, because it definitely does to clever people, it points out the ridiculousness of borders and the ridiculousness of different rules applying to different people in the world. You so all of a sudden, I mean, you hear about these people. You can't, just because he's born there is poor, and just because they're born there, they're rich, and so on and so forth. You hear all these narratives, but it's sort of hard to put a finger on until you've met people from all over the world and talk to them face to face. And now everyone can do that, and everyone can talk to absolutely everyone, anyone else in the world, and that's truly a magical thing for world peace, I think. And I think it's severely underrated because it makes us closer to one another. And going to war, just imagining during the Second World War, Sweden was neutral, but really allied with Germany. And just the thought of having to go to war with one of you two, it's completely alien to me. Or with anyone else in the world I've talked to, just war in general is completely why would anyone on earth fall for that bullshit? Why would anyone take an order from some third party to kill someone? It's completely ridiculous. And I think the social media and video conferencing, especially in combination with Bitcoin, when we realize that we don't need all these leaders and rulers. What we need is a fixed set of rules so we can operate with one another. We have that now, so we don't need any of the other bullshit. None of it.
Yeah.
It's all bullshit. It's all a facade. All the emperors are naked. And my hope, at least, is that people will figure this out because it's so bleeding obvious. What we're doing now, we're in an anarchistic relationship with one another, us three right now. There is no coercion or violence going on whatsoever. So we're without a ruler, without anyone setting any rules, we're able to have a civil conversation.
Yeah.
What we do.
What we do.
And people think this is unnatural and it needs to be controlled and we need to, quell free speech and we need to this and that. That's all bullshit. All of it. As long as we have functioning money, we don't need anything else. Anything else is just bad actors doing bad things.
Yeah. Yeah. And my first thread that got really viral, I don't know if you read it or not, but it was the idea of how we have less in common with the future than we do with the past. And I think this is one of those really big ideas that, I like your analogy with Zoom there, or well, not just analogy, but the practical example of Zoom. But I think this is one of those examples. I didn't go into this in the thread, but I think this is one of them because up to this point in history, all that these empires and dictatorships and democracies and republics and monarchies and, oligarchies, all these political systems are basically just systems of preserving rules in the most orderly fashion possible. And, up to this point, the best way to do that, or the most efficient way to do that, let's say, is to have a bigger gun than the other person, a bigger gun diplomacy. And up to this point, that's worked because, if you're Rome and you have, bigger spears or bigger catapults than your enemy. You can expand your borders and take a larger share of the world and create the same basis of rules within that border. And then within that, then you get that prosperity, and that prosperity rises up because people are able to operate in a given set of rules. Obviously, until
given that they don't change too often and that they aren't too draconian in the first place.
Yeah. Until somebody says, "Hey, I want to change the rules to benefit me and my constituents more." And so then, you decouple the money with reality, you violate the law of conservation of energy. And then eventually, as the rules of that system, that political system begin to shift, then the whole system's value begins to, or continues to decline. And so up to this point, we've had these cycles, and, it's so funny because the world feels so strange now. I think people are like grasping for what's causing it. And I think most people run to politics. They think it's either, I'm in the States, so a lot of people think it's either Trump or Biden's fault or Obama's, or, they want to just assign this politician as what doomed America or whatever. Or they want to say that this law or this, or, whatever. They basically want to assign all the overseers of the rules with the problem. The problem itself is that we have a system of rules that is not fixed. And because it's not fixed, eventually it has to change. And like you said, with the money, that whole era of thinking for thousands of years is, at least to me and to you, on its way out. That for the first time, we have a given set of the rules of the most important layer of society, which is that the money. And because we have a fixed set of rules, now we can actually communicate efficiently. We don't have the price of money changing at the wills of the at the will of the rule makers trying to determine what's best at preserving stability. Instead, we have a free and open market communications mechanism that, with volatile fashion, adjusts to the needs of the market and adjusts to that exponential curve of technology. And so now that we have this, I fully agree. The financial incentive for governments to exist has just been catastrophically gutted. And
funny you should mention the political divide there, because like I view it as two different nuances of the same thing, the red and the blue. Because for every blue-haired vegan, lesbian, gluten intolerant environmentalist lady out there, there's a gun-loving, stereo-pumped skinhead with a gas-guzzling pickup truck somewhere, and a Confederacy flag fighting for his cause. And I mean, you might prefer one to the other, but they are two aspects of the same phenomena. I feel like humanity is like, especially in social media, the fringes of each political, idea sphere gets amplified a lot. So you hear about the craziest ideas on both sides of the aisle, but it feels like there's a pendulum effect. Like when there were too many vegans, there carnivory happened, and when there's too much social justice warrior stuff going on, then all of a sudden people become devout Christians who don't jerk off. And like there's so much either or in the world. And what I long for is a Bitcoin world where you can also hear a more nuanced take on stuff, and people who just don't fall into the intellectual laziness trap of, taking the conspiracy theory for being true just because as soon as they figure out that what the government says is a lie, they immediately cling on to all the conspiracy theories that are out. And that's just lazy thinking. I mean, one thing not being true does not automatically make every other theory true. It's the same thing with the science being conflated with science, because science is a very good thing. The science is not.
Well, I think as a practical example, I just thought of what you're saying. I think, the whole 2020 pandemic lockdown, I think that's a big part of what woke people up, is that they saw the insanity on both sides. And it doesn't matter what your opinions were going into it. It's like that happened. The world shut down for 3 months, and then kind of reopened, then shut down again, and we're still but anyway, then like you said, we had all these people to like basically change definition of science. And we had this rapidly produced series of vaccines, and the narrative and the reports and everything continued to shift on that. And, you can be pro-vaccine, but still the reality is like a lot really, really poor insight went into the reporting and the research of that. And we're still trying to figure that out. And then likewise, there were a lot of other people that thought the vaccines were, like microchipping people.
Yeah.
Sort of weird matrix.
Let's put it this way. For every Greta Thunberg, there's an Andrew Tate.
That's a great way to, and at the end of the day, probably a more related example I like is that of the economic debate between the left and the right. Basically all the, as you put it, the blue-haired lesbian women versus all the, redneck pickup truck guys. It's like, typically the more left-leaning folks are very much against capitalists or free markets or one's, ability of self-ownership of, economic value. And the other side is very much against the opposite of that, being the politicians, and so after the 2008 crisis, pretty much everyone on the more conservative side blamed, the politicians, and pretty much everyone on the left-leaning side blamed all the capitalists from Wall Street.
And they're the same thing.
It's the same thing. It's the same thing. And
they're in cahoots. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And that's the thing. And conservatives generally want to spend more on the military budget and policing and stuff like that, and meddle with like whatever how people want to live their lives, which is none of their business either. So there's always this, like I said, the pendulum effect going on.
We'd just like to mention a couple of our show's sponsors, things that we care about and that we think are useful to Bitcoiners all over. So first up is the Orange Pill app. Download the Orange Pill app today from the orangepillapp.com.
Yeah, Orange Pill app. Woo! Rocket ship, get on board.
It's available for iOS and Android. Stack friends and meet like-minded people near you. Connect with your favorite Bitcoiners and speed up hyper-Bitcoinization. We're really excited about the Orange Pill app and its potential to connect Bitcoiners in their local area. Download the Orange Pill app.
It's not a dating app, but you can use it for dating. Download now.
Next up is Wasabi Wallet. It's a great desktop wallet that has privacy by default and CoinJoin built in. It recycles your UTXOs around so that no one knows who you are after it's done the process. Check out wasabiwallet.io. Make sure that that's the actual link you check out because there are scammers out there who want to steal your Bitcoin. But it works in the background. Tor is built in. And when you send coins to it, the coins you take out are private. So download Wasabi Wallet today.
I'm wearing these shades in tribute to Wasabi Wallet because your OPSEC is important. So I'm totally anonymous now, just so you know.
I think this has been great to see that the two of you have a lot of interesting views that are synergizing in interesting ways. And the biggest thing that actually came to mind somewhere in the first long thing that you said, Luke, was you're doing great with Bitcoiners and in the Bitcoin community for good reason, because you're articulating the things in your threads in a very good way. But it's also important that we bring these ideas to non-Bitcoiners. And have you thought about how your messaging and the things that you're doing could also resonate with non-Bitcoiners? Have you thought about that?
How do you orange pill blue-haired vegan lesbians?
Oh my goodness! Can you help me out with that? I will say that it's fascinating, but I love that question. I'll get to it, but just bridging the two ideas, it's fascinating to me how the different political aisles come to Bitcoin in different ways. The conservatives usually come to it from financial conservatism, and the more liberals tend to come to it from the social outcomes. It's like, wait, you're telling me that, this racial injustice and, your racial injustice, Bitcoin helps alleviate racial injustice, income inequality, climate change, this and that, the other. It satisfies progressives. And the conservatives, it's like, you want financial conservatism, you want, more libertarian and anarchy ideas in your work. It's like Bitcoin's solution. So anyway, I find it fascinating how, it's both sides of the aisle come to the same conclusion here. And likewise, both sides of the aisle have different disagreements with Bitcoin. The more progressives hate Bitcoin because it uses too much energy, and the more conservative folks hate Bitcoin because it's not the U.S. dollar and government. It's
not patriotic enough.
Yeah. But both Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump hate Bitcoin. So I don't know. I think that's a win for Bitcoin.
And both are commies, by the way. That's one thing I found fascinating during the Trump years is when Trump gave out $1,000 to each American as a COVID relief thing. And and the reactions to that across the world, because no one seemed to get what was actually going on. Because when America runs the money printer to give free money to people in America, what they're basically doing is they're pickpocketing out of everyone else on the globe's pockets. So I paid for the American relief money. And I tried to tell people this in Sweden and here in Spain. And don't you realize that what he's doing is stealing from you when he does that? And he's doing it in a very commie fashion. And you call him an evil capitalist. He's not a capitalist. He's a commie. Stealing from other people in other countries without even being ashamed of it. But people just don't connect those dots.
No, most people, I remember being one of the only people during that whole era, frankly, that was not terrified, but extremely concerned of inflation and what is this going to do? And we don't know how bad this is going to be. And granted, it's been pretty bad. It's been 3 years now, and the economy's still messed up, and it looks like it's just going to get worse in the next couple of years. I mean, it really did a lot of damage. And it was very frustrating. I felt like I was in my own little world that, I saw the lines for people to get their checks, where I was. And I remember I was like, this is insane. It's and it's not. I mean,
did you immediately convert it into Bitcoin?
I don't remember how much I got. I didn't get as much as a lot of people did. But,
okay.
I don't remember. I don't think I did immediately convert it into Bitcoin.
All right.
But if it were to happen again, definitely I would just use it on Bitcoin or pay my monthly expenses with it and convert proceeds, which I guess is the same thing. Anyway, I felt like I was in my own world because it's all these people are aligned and they don't realize that what's basically happening is that the U.S. government and Donald Trump at that point basically irrelevant. If we ousted him out, we just put someone back in that was just as bad, if not worse, at doing what we want, which is free money. And it's what are we doing? We're creating more political currency units. And we're not creating any value. So what we're doing is we're redistributing the current value within the political currency unit system away from the developing world, away from Africa, away from Asia, away from Europe, away from everywhere else in the world. Frankly, we're at much higher risk than, us in the US. If our economy shuts down for 3 months, we missed out the newest and greatest phone and the newest movie, but, the economy in the third world or in the developing world, shuts down. That life and death. And so it was extremely frustrating that this was happening. And everyone was kind of going with the mass psychosis of this is okay, this is unprecedented, blah, 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 blah. And nobody was questioning what if what we're doing is causing extremely lingering damage. And also what we're doing is we're causing extremely lingering damage to literally the most at-risk places in the world economically. So anyway, just to rant on that.
The thing people need to realize is that voting for this and that politician won't solve any of these issues. It cannot, because the money is more powerful than any politician can be. And the only way, all politicians now have to face either the recession of a century or depression, or to just roll the snowball for 4 more years so they don't lose face. That's the options they have. Either be the worst president or prime minister in your country's history for the last couple of 5 generations or something. Either face that or and be, have pitchforks and torches after you, or just postpone the problem to the next guy.
Yeah.
That's the only options available.
Yeah, that's it. I don't see any third option. And for me,
well, there's Bitcoin.
Yeah, well, yes, that is correct. But outside the system, within the system, there's no third option. The third option is to think outside the system. But yeah, to add on to that, one of the moments that for me was an aha moment, and I think most people are yet to realize, is that even if you were in charge, you may not question other people's motivation or whatever, but we all think that we're special. So, but for me, it's like, I realized even if I was in charge, if I was sole global or American dictator and I controlled everything and I was, let's say I could, which is impossible, but if I was, like, I know I couldn't stop it. I couldn't save it because
it's out of your power.
It's out of our power because what is the Federal Reserve and the U.S. government, along with the EU and, most other countries, are right now. The problem is that they're basically oscillating between the threat of hyperinflation or persistent inflation, or the threat of, as you put it, recession or possibly depression. And it's like, what is the Federal Reserve doing? They're basically oscillating between tightening at unprecedented rates, expanding at unprecedented rates. And the only reason we haven't collapsed into hyperinflation is because the U.S. government is right now putting in the threat of a recession and a depression. If they weren't doing that, it's like inflation would just keep going up. And likewise, when we do get at that point that something is breaking, there's some liquidity, whenever the weakest point in this open system breaks and the energy begins flowing out and things begin deflating, like at a rapid pace, the only reason why it won't continue is because then they'll transition the pendulum back to the threat of inflation. And like the only prevention against depression is hyperinflation. And the only prevention against depression is, prevention against hyperinflation is depression. And then you just have to ask yourself, which is the government going to choose? And they'll choose the one of those two scenarios. Has them retain the most amount of power possible. And to me, the obvious answer for that is inflation. That they'll continue choosing inflation. And that's what they did for a century. And anyway.
I heard some weird figure that over 50% of all the properties sold in the US last year were sold for the purpose of turning them into Airbnbs, basically. Renting them out there, or they were not. The purpose was not for the purchaser to live in the house, like,
that sounds...
which I think it sounds like such a Fiat figure and such a destructive, point to be in time. And I know, I back in Sweden, I had my last Fiat job. I was an HR manager for a pretty big company, so I had what was considered a good salary there. But still, I made more money from living in my house during that time than I made from my salary, just by the price of the house going up. And that was true for everyone else I knew as well, which is just, and I know this is the case in most Western countries, like house prices are going up at a pace so that you owning assets is way more profitable than working. No matter what kind of a job you're doing, like owning assets is the shit. I mean, what we're doing is I have a brother that's 10 years younger than me, and he can't get into the housing market. It's impossible. Like, the hurdles are so much bigger than they were 10 years ago when I got in, and they were big back then as well. Like, or 10 years earlier, I should say, not 10 years ago, but 10 years earlier. I got in a bit earlier than that. But the thing is, a system in which it's better to just own stuff and sell them at a later date than to actually work. Think about what those incentives lead to in the long run. It leads to no one working and everyone hoarding stuff, not producing anything.
Yeah.
And it's just horrible. It's just like the most destructive incentive system you could think of. It incentivizes rich people to be assholes. So it incentivizes rich pricks and poor schmucks. That's what it does.
You're not wrong.
No,
you're not wrong. Definitely. One of the things that people keep commenting on Twitter with my interview with Preston was this exact point I was making, that if you corrupt the money, you corrupt the incentives, because now the incentive is away from productivity and towards management, towards speculation, towards financials and everything. And when you do that, you corrupt society. And it's like people are so baffled today why is it that the culture feels weirder? Why is it politicians feel that they can lie more than they did in the past and they get away with it? It's like, it makes no sense. That when the money is lies, everything is lies. Misinformation is a big thing now. At least, here in the States, it's like, it's all, some people can talk about misinformation. It's like, well, the money is misinformation. The money is not true. It's not a true value communications. No, it's just not. And until the incentive structure changes, that's not going to change. And it's not some savior or some angel that comes in and performs, X industry of the US. It's not be some bill or some president or some, perfect, political party that fixes everything. It's like, you can't do that. You can't.
It's going to be a white paper.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's not some angel within that rules-based system. It has to be a rules-based system that is contradictory to that and actually has incentives that work and incentivize productivity and away from financialization.
And this is what's so refreshing about being in the Bitcoin space, because you can actually see that happening firsthand. And you can also see that because Bitcoin is a complete meritocracy. There is we need more women here, or we need more people of color, or anything like that. There are women, and there are people of color. There are people from all over the place, and from all walks of life. And nobody gives a shit where they're coming from. Everybody, the only thing that gives merit is merit and proof of work, and talent and proof of work. And it's such a refreshing environment to be in, because all of the political signaling bullshit is gone. There's none of it, because Bitcoin can't give a shit about that. But Bitcoin by design cannot give a shit about who you are. And it's so refreshing in a world that is so, clown worldly at this point. I mean, look what Disney has done to Star Wars and Marvel in the last couple of years. It's impressive how they managed to ruin every 12-year-old boys heroes and reduce them into being ashamed of being guys, basically. It's everywhere in our culture, this justice warrior thing. And it's hard to get around when you start thinking about it, when you get a comment like, someone commented on our Free Madeira organization, why don't you have more women on the board? And I'm like, no one even thought about it until then. It turns out we do have a woman on the board. Nobody even reflected over that. So but it's so weird, and we wouldn't have thought any different about it if there were only women on the board. Like, who cares? It's what you do that matters, right?
Yeah.
So I certainly hope that Bitcoin will help inject a dose of sanity back into society, where you're judged by what you do and what you and not what you claim that you believe.
I hope Bitcoin injects a dose of sanity to society, as well as reducing the financial incentive towards insanity.
Yeah, exactly.
This is true.
Yeah.
So Luke had a question earlier that I want to get back to that, I guess, because I don't want to leave him hanging. But you asked about orange pilling and educating folks that aren't into Bitcoin, right?
How does your message fit with non-Bitcoiners? I think that maybe is a little easier to tackle directly.
Oh yeah.
One of the amazing things with Twitter, as for me, has just been how many people message me say that, I kind of understood Bitcoin, but now I understand it. Or people that say like, wow, I like this blew my mind, and I get it, and I'm going to learn more now. I think for me, one of the reasons I made so many slides is to educate people. I've talked to a lot of folks, real estate folks, stock folks, a lot of typical, 60-40 retirement portfolio folks, some that are professional investors themselves, some that are broke college students with like, $500, some in the developing world with like, $500 total, and some that, just hire a financial advisor or manager to manage a portfolio. And I think for me, what I've seen that continually hits a chord with people is defining the problem so clearly, so obviously, and make it appear so inevitable that we need a solution. And then basically define the problem well enough that Bitcoin becomes the only obvious solution. So like my first thread that one first went viral instantly, the one that I continue to refer back to for people, is basically just to point out the paradox that everything's getting more affordable and yet prices are going up, and how little sense that makes. And I think when people really ask themselves that question and they view that paradox, I think that's the first moment, at least I've seen it, and I've seen people's eyes light up when they think of that. And it's amazing for me because it's like, okay, now you're getting it. Because we're humans and we have emotions, and fundamentally we think the world works the way it does because it's always worked that way. And that's just not necessarily true. We think prices go up just because that's what they do. I don't have a degree in finance, and I'm sure if I had a degree in finance, I would know or whatever. But prices go up, like they just do. As the economy gets more prosperous, the prices go up or whatever. We come up with these truisms that just aren't true because our brains like to tell a story and justify why the world is the way it is. Likewise, things become cheaper and more affordable. The marginal cost of energy and prosperity go down. But for most people, and that was my first thread, is basically pushing in that paradox, is that if technology is making everything cheaper, faster, better for more people, why are prices going up? You have more prosperity determined within a ledger, and yet you divide that amount of money by these assets and goods and services. The prices should be going down, yet they're going up. And then, from there, you basically begin to explain how the world has worked for so long, that you have a series of political regimes, and within those regimes, we have monetary ledgers, and some forms of money are better than others. Gold is a better form of money than, say, seashells. Seashells, arguably, depending on the kind of shell, are better than fiat money, or at least in the ancient world they were. And so, basically you have these cycles, and you basically inject a good bit of incentives, game theory, all that, and all of a sudden, your entire view of history changes of the past, and you realize, history is basically this repeating cycle of political regimes and incentive structures rolling over as a function of technology. And so these cycles get faster and faster. An empire, in the ancient world lasted thousands of years. That, a few hundred years ago, you had, colonial empires and dynasties that lasted centuries. And now we're at a point where, for a few decades for this power, a few decades for that power. And, it becomes clear to you, before coming to Bitcoin, the solution that, okay, our problem today is that they're currently at another rollover, and whatever comes next has to come faster. The technology has to continue to get better if we're going to be reasonable, and therefore the rollovers have to get faster. That the fiat rollovers and the political regime rollovers have to get faster. And it's just an incentive structure. As they get faster, people have less trust in their permanence. And as people have less trust in their permanence, they have more difficulty to rise and more easily can fall. And so it becomes clear that's the problem, that technology is just going to continue to get faster and better. And basically what that means is that as these things diverge, as a function of time, one's ability to keep up with the rate of technological change will only become more important. Right now, technology changes really fast. It's hard for 70, 80-year-olds to keep up. Well, frankly, I'm more worried about my generation. When my generation are 50 or 60 years old, it will be just as difficult for them, even though they'll be more prosperous and healthier and everything than the current generation was at that age. The technology will be so much faster when I'm younger than them that it'll be even harder for me to catch. And then their kids will be in their 20s, 30s, or maybe even early 40s. It'll be hard for them to keep up. And this curve is just getting steeper. And so when I really define that problem, and I define it as well as I can, that this curve is only getting steeper. And as that gets steeper, it causes everything else to become faster, and these political regimes have to continue to cycle over. Then it becomes apparent that, okay, we need some form of money that's technologically native, something that is outside the whims of political interests. And therefore, the only way to do that is outside human intervention entirely. It has to be immutable. It has to be fixed because it has to be a given amount, in the same way that the speed of light is a constant, or the same way that a meter stick is a constant, or that Kelvin or Celsius are constants. We have to have a network of value, back to the Mona Lisa metaphor. We have to have a clear frame that borders the painting. And we can divide that painting up as much as we want infinitely, but there has to be a frame. And right now we don't have that. And so eventually then you realize, okay, this is an engineering problem. And, then like Tesla and Ford and everyone else, all the engineers of the 20th century predicted, then you eventually begin to realize, okay, Bitcoin is this thing. And so when it comes to educating people about Bitcoin, I think the best way is not to talk about Bitcoin first. I think it's to define the problem. And the problem is basically you can't have humans be in charge of a ledger that the incentive to correct said ledger only increases as that ledger becomes more valuable. I mean, it's like a catch-22. It's a paradox. If the ledger is uncorrupted, that ledger becomes more valuable. And if it becomes valuable, the incentive to corrupt it only goes up. And so I think defining that as an essential problem that needs to be solved if the world's going to continue at the rate and the arc that it's going on now, it's like, okay, this is inevitable to come. And that's what Tesla and Ford understood. This is inevitable. We're somehow going to find a way to do it because we have to. And when we do, as how Finney said, the only logical conclusion is that upon its creation, as you eloquently put it, it's an invention, but it's also a discovery, mathematical scarcity. I can't do it word for word, but it's a discovery. It can only be done once.
Yeah.
If you were to recreate it, you just make a lesser version of the original. And why trust that? So basically, if it's inevitable and if it's a threat to everything else, going back to my point earlier, then looking at Bitcoin, it's survived 14 years. It appears very likely to be that thing. And if it continues to survive, then everything else is an extremely risky bet against Bitcoin. So, yeah.
Let's see if I remember that one-shot principle on top of my head. Absolute mathematical scarcity achieved by consensus in a sufficiently decentralized distributed network was a discovery rather than an invention. It cannot be discovered again because the very thing discovered was resistance to replicability itself. Yeah, that's the way I put it in the second book, Independence Reimagined. And I'm just awaiting a proof print of the rehash of that book. So I'm putting Sovereignty Through Mathematics and Independence Reimagined together as one book. Yeah. So we're re-releasing them here coming within a month, I hope. They will be available.
Great.
Yeah.
That's great.
Looking forward to that. I think there's Captain America's shield on the cover with a Bitcoin B instead of a star. Hey, Luke, can you tell our listeners a bit more about the Consensus Network, the platform that this show is on, and the publishing house that publishes my books? What is the Consensus Network, Luke?
Thanks, Knut. The Consensus Network is a Bitcoin-only publisher and translator. In other words, translates Bitcoin books into all sorts of languages. Anyone who's interested in translating a book into their language can get in touch with the Consensus Network to help translate and spread the Bitcoin message throughout the world. We have lots of great examples here. Knut's books are some of the most popular on the site. Check out consensus.network or bitcoinbook.shop to see everything that Consensus has to offer.
That's bitcoinbook.shop. Use the affiliate code Footprint for 10% off.
Knut, can you tell us about how to get in touch with you and find out more about your stuff and the things that you're involved in these days?
Yeah, sure, Luke. So I'm at Knut Svanholm on Twitter. I also have a website, knutsvanholm.com, where you can find all of my books. There's a whole bunch of books. These old two ones, Sovereignty Through Mathematics and Independence Reimagined, are being rehashed into one book that's coming out with a foreword by Prince Philip. I'm also making a wine. I'm not making this wine, but this is a wine bottle with a Bitcoin B on it that you can sign up for on my website. And you can also find all sorts of Everything Divided merch if you're interested in that. So that's how you support me.
Hey, Luke, thanks a lot for this. And I think we might be at a good spot to somewhat wrap this up, but I do want to ask you one more thing. And this is kind of a future-looking thing. What are you seeing yourself doing in the Bitcoin space over the, say, medium term, next 6 to 12 months, something like that?
Yeah.
Great question.
Yeah, I appreciate that. To be honest, it's been like a whirlwind. I as you can imagine, I'm just very busy in general. And so then for this Twitter thing to blow up, suddenly like, oh wow, now I'm even more busy. And so I try to keep up with that and not overwhelm myself, because I know that it's the quality, not the quantity of ideas that are useful. So I'm trying to keep up with that, not overwhelm myself, and get on all the other platforms and do all that. But basically what I really hope to do for the next few months is just explore, meet people such as you two and other folks. I go on like dozens of podcasts the next couple months. Like I'm already scheduling up to summer, and which is kind of mind blowing. But then going to conferences, like I said, I'm going to meet up with Greg Foss tomorrow. So that'll be quite the experience. It won't be like yours in Bulgaria in a bus for 4 days, but that'll be great. And I'm going to the Thank God for Bitcoin conference in Miami, and it followed by the Bitcoin conference in Miami. So hopefully it meets people there. So
I'm planning to go to Miami, so hopefully we'll see each other there.
Yeah.
I haven't worked out all the details yet, so it's not 100% fixed, but the plan is to go there.
I love it. I love to meet you. Yeah, that's great. Yeah. But yeah, that's pretty much it. The next 6 months, I hope to meet lots of people, gain ideas, share ideas, grow the following as much as I can or whatever. And, it's, I would make clear, like, I really don't care about the attention. Like, frankly, it's kind of nice. I'm not going to lie. It feels really good when you have people.
It is nice. We shouldn't.
Yeah, it's very nice.
Be ashamed of that.
No.
Being recognized for something you did is a beautiful thing.
Yeah. Perfect work. Perfect work, I suppose. So yeah, but my goal is just to explore and grow this as much as I can for the next halving, because I know that in a couple of years, Bitcoin is probably just going to start going up, and the need for Bitcoiners and their ideas and insight is just going to go up. And I don't know if I'll be like consulting for high net worth people, or if I'll be putting out, charitable things for people in the developing world that need it. But I know that everyone will need to learn this at some point in the near future. And so I'm just trying to get ready the best I can myself.
You have to be prepared, because when Bitcoin 10x's, you 10x. So you have to be prepared for that. Any plans on coming to Europe?
I would invite you to Europe. Yeah.
I can recommend BTC Prague as well in June, just a month after the Miami conference. That's the biggest European conference in Prague. It's going to be beautiful. A lot of big names there. I think that they're aiming for like 10,000 guests or something. Wow. So it's going to be a big one. Everyone's going to be there.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, of course that one. And Baltic Honey Badger in Riga is very, very nice too in the fall. And then, of course, there may or may not be a conference in Madeira coming up, announced. We don't know. I know nothing. I'm not from Barcelona, but I'm from somewhere. And I definitely don't know anything about the conference in Madeira, do I, Luke?
No, you don't. Not that I'm aware of anyway.
Okay.
But you should come to Prague. You should absolutely come to Prague. If you're free and you're able, it's going to be a great time. And definitely the Miami conference, it'll be comparable to that, I think, based on what they've announced.
Yeah,
great.
Absolutely. Yeah. And once again, Luke, thank you so much for coming on the show. You have a fascinating story, and I think you have a bright orange future ahead of you in the coming months and years. And looking forward to seeing you in real life, and looking forward to having more conversations with you in the future. And who knows, maybe a collaboration at some point. Who knows? Well, we'll see.
Would love it.
So
thank you.
Good luck with everything. And thank you for this.
Appreciate it very much. Thanks for having me on. It's been great to meet you both.
Yeah. Keep on doing what you do.
Thanks.
Likewise. And before you go, any last, the place you want to send our listeners, anything you want to plug?
I'm on Twitter, Luke Broyles, Broyles. That's my main thing right now. I'm getting YouTube. Well, actually, I already have a YouTube channel, but I'm getting that expanded, and a couple other things, but in good time. So, but yeah, Twitter for now. I'll post everything I do on Twitter.
Great to hear. Just wanted to confirm. Thanks again. And this has been the Freedom Footprint Show. Thanks for listening.